Hey guys, this is Alex Dibison, and this is the fourth video in a series of videos detailing the creation and implementation of the user story number 2416 of the BreazeHome application, viewing competition for a property. Now if you have any questions about the user story after this video, please feel free to contact me. I'll be posting my contact info at the end of the video. And if you have any questions pertaining to the BreazeHome project as a whole, please feel free to contact Professor Masood Sajadi, who is acting as both mentor and product owner for the BreazeHome application. Now, in the previous videos of this series, we created the user story number 2416 on Mingle and completed the requirements elicitation, requirements analysis, system design, and object design. It was with this that we were able to create use case diagrams, class diagrams, and sequence diagrams for this user story. Now, in this video, we'll move on to actually implementing and testing this user story. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to want to do, as always, is go to our sprint board and update what we've done since the last video. Now in the last video we completed our object design, and we're going to move this over here. And in this video we're going to finally start implementing our user story and creating API endpoints and front-end service. So we're going to be moving these two tasks into development. With that done, we can now move towards implementation. Now, I'll be implementing this user story in the BreazeHome development virtual machine, and I'll be using the Atom text editor to edit all the files. So right here you can see the two repos that I talked about during system design and object design. The desktop repo as well as the Django API repo. Now these repos can be accessed via the git.breazehome website, and Git version control is essential when working on implementation. So to see how to use Git and version control, I have another series of videos detailing its use on the BreazeHome wiki. But in this video, we'll be focusing primarily on how this user story is implemented and not on Git. So the first thing we're going to do is access the Breeze API.Django, and we're going to go towards the real estate app. And if you remember from the system design and object design, there are a couple things we want to create first to create this API. First thing I'm going to want to do is go in the models, and we're going to want to actually create the models that are going to be in the database and that are going to store our viewing info. So right here you can see the model that's storing our viewing info, and we've called it property view count. Right? So essentially just create the class, and I have a entry right here, which is a one-to-one field. Basically, each property view count entry can only be attached to one property, right? Because I don't want multiple copies of these things in my database, right? And once we have that, then I'm also storing the counts for each day. So you see I have the count of the amount of times it's been viewed on Monday, as well as the date over here. And this is repeated for each day of the week, all the way towards Sunday. And finally there's an entry for the amount of views for a week, and there's also an entry for the total amount of views for the lifetime of that property. Right, so once I've created this model, we've basically got the outline of what's going to be created in our database and what information we're going to store in the database. So once the model's been completed, alright, next thing we're going to want to do is then go towards the views. Or actually, yeah, the views. So here we have two views that we're implementing for the view competition for property API. So one view is used to update the view counts right over here, and the other view should be used to actually get the view counts. Now in the update view count, essentially I'm using this Serializer class over here called property view count Serializer, which is also created in here. Essentially this Serializer is dictating what information is being extracted from the database. And right now I'm just telling it to extract all the fields from the database since I need all the fields. When I go back to this view, I have this get method. And this get method is getting the viewing information for a specific property. Alright? And if you see here, once it gets the viewing information for a specific property, it increments the view count, saves the information, and then returns the viewing information. Okay? Now in addition to this get method, there's a variety of other methods that were created. One to increment the count, one to calculate the weekly sum of the property, and then there are individual methods for each day of the week to increment the data for that specific day and also update the date for that entry. So if I open up Monday over here, this method just checks to see whether whatever day of the week, if the Monday that's listed in the database, if that date matches today's date, and if it does, it's going to increment it. If it doesn't, it'll change the date, and otherwise it's just going to do nothing, right? So we have all these methods for each day of the week, and we also have a method that calculates the weekly viewing data over here, right? And in addition to that, we also have a simple method that increments just the view count for the total view count and the weekly view count. Now once we have the views created, so we've got this update view count and this property view count, and this one just simply gets the viewing property data. We're gonna want to actually register this in the URLs. And this is done by accessing the Breeze app and then the URLs over here. And in the URLs, this is where I create the tags that I'm going to be using to access this API from the front end. So since the viewing data is all stored in the real estate and under the properties section, I have these views nested in properties. So over here you can see I'm registering this property view count set with a tag called views. I'm also registering the property update count view set with a tag called update views. So I'll be using these tags in the front end to access the API. Now once I've updated these three files, the URLs, actually four files, the URLs, the serializer, the views, and the models, my back end is essentially done, and I've created an API endpoint for updating and getting the view count. With the back end done, we can now move on to the front end. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is open up the Breeze desktop repo. And we're going to want to go to app right over here. And under app, we're going to want to check the app.js file, which should be under scripts and right over here. So once you open it, we're going to use this to see what controller is going to be in control of the page of interest for us. And for the user story, we want to show competition for a specific property, and we get our property info on the details page. So when I look at the app.js, I'm scrolling through and I see that right here is the details HTML page, and the controller in control of it is results detail controller. So now that I know what controller is in control of this, I'm now going to go to controllers, and I can see the detail control over here. And if I check the detail controller, I can see that it's actually called, detail controller here. If I check the detail controller, I can see that it's actually called the results detail controller. So the names match. Now, once here, this is the place where I want to make a call to my service that's then going to make a call to the Django API. Okay, so I do that right over here. And you can see it's properties, update property views. And I take the route parameters, which is essentially the ID of the property, and I get the property viewing data. So now that I've made this call over here, I've got to actually make this method. And to make this method, I'm going to go to services, and I'm going to go to properties and add this service to it. So in the property service, here I'm going to add the update property views method, and it's going to take the ID of the property and make the get call to my Django API. And if you look here, it's making the call to the update views. Alright, I made a tag name that returned the update views view set, and I gave that tag name update views. So now that I have this set and I have the data being called over here in the details.js, I now need to extract that data and display it on the HTML page. So the final step is then to go to the HTML page and to find an appropriate place to display the viewing data. And right over here, add the total views, and I use the scope and get the total count, and then I have the weekly views, and through the scope I get the weekly count. And just like that, I've implemented the user story 2416, and all that's left is to run it and see if it works properly. With the front end complete as well as the back end, I can now move on and see if what I've actually coded actually works. So to do this, I'm going to run the back end, which I've run in this terminal over here. I'm going to run the front end as well. Now, once these run, it's going to open up the web browser, and I'll test to see whether or not I'm keeping track of the total view counts and weekly view counts as anticipated. Okay, so here's the results page, and I can see in the back end the various API calls that are made. Click on a property, and I can see the total view counts and weekly view counts. And if I look on this page, I can actually look and see that I'm actually making the call right over here that updates the view count and returns it on this page. So if I refresh this page, this should increment by 1 as well as this. Refresh, and it's as expected right over here, and I can see it making another update call here as well. Alright, so now that I've seen that what I've coded and implemented actually works, we now have to actually test it more rigorously, and we'll be doing this using the Selenium testing tool. So to view how to install and set up Selenium, I have a tutorial series on the BreazeHome wiki which goes over the installation process, the setup process, and how to create the scripts needed to actually make unit tests for the user stories that you may have. Now for this video I already have a script written here. I'm not going to go over how to actually install or use Selenium. We're just going to go over the unit tests made and the testing process for this user story. So right over here you can see that I have my script that's going to run my unit tests, and I have 2 unit tests here. So the first unit test over here is getting an expected value for both the total view count and weekly view count on a property details page. So it gets the current total count and weekly count and increments it by 1, because this unit test is testing whether or not the view counts are being incremented properly whenever the page is refreshed. So once I get my 2 expected values, the page is refreshed right over here, and then I extract the actual values that are on the refreshed page, and I check to see whether they're equal right over here. So that's basically what's happening in the first unit test. In the next unit test, it's very similar to the first test. Instead, the sequence of events is changed. In the first unit test, I went to the specific property and I refreshed the page to check whether or not the view counts would increment properly. In the second unit test, I'm going to go to a page, get the view counts that I expect to get, and instead of refreshing the page, I'm going to exit that page, go to a different page, and come back and see whether or not the view counts are incremented properly. So you can see that occurring right over here, where I'm getting the total view counts, the expected counts, and you see that I'm going to the browser history, going back a page, and then accessing the page again right here, clicking on the specific property, getting the newly incremented view counts, and checking to see whether they're equal to the expected counts. And now that I have those 2 unit tests written up, all that's left is to run the script and see if this user story, if the unit tests actually pass or fail. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna open up a new terminal. Gonna change directories to the directory that holds the script, and we're gonna run the script. Oh, actually, I named it wrong. There. Okay, so unit tests, well, the Selenium automation's running. Alright, access the property, looking at the view counts. Alright, moving on to the next unit test, checking properties again. So when we ran the unit test, we got some errors, and this is to be expected when you're running unit tests for user stories. You're gonna either have failed tests or you're gonna get errors in your script. Whenever that happens, either tweak the code if you have failed tests, or if you have errors in your script, go back to the script and fix it. So essentially in this video, we went over the development process and the testing process for user story number 2416. And in the next video, we'll be going over how to actually deploy the user story once it's been completed. And this entails getting approval from the product owner, as well as the various other tasks that are required after a user story has been completed as well. If you have any questions about what was discussed in this video, please feel free to contact me at my email indicated right over here, or you can also reach me through my LinkedIn account right over here. And if you have any questions about the BreazeHome project as a whole, please feel free to contact Professor Sajati at the email indicated below.